Thank you very much. We continue this afternoon with topical questions. Our first question is from Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government what resources it is allocating to address human trafficking and exploitation.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
The horrifying discovery in Essex last week underlines in the gravest terms the seriousness of this issue, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of the Chamber in passing on our condolences to the family and loved ones of those who so tragically lost their lives. Migrant Help and Traffic Awareness Raising Alliance, known as TARA, are funded by the Scottish Government to support victims of human trafficking and exploitation. TARA support women trafficked for the purposes of commercial sexual exploitation, and Migrant Help support all other adult victims of human trafficking and exploitation. They'll share over £3 million across financial years 18-19, 19-20 and 2021. We're also providing funding of £120,000 this financial year to NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde to provide a national psychological trauma support service to adult trafficking victims. We're also providing £300,000 to the Aberlour Child Care Trust and the Scottish Refugee Service to deliver the Scottish Guardianship Service in this financial year. A wide range of partners throughout Scotland also dedicate resources under the framework of a collaborative approach set out in our trafficking and exploitation strategy published in May 2017.
Sarah Boyack.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response? The support that is available is very much welcome given the horrendous exploitation people have faced who have been trafficked. Will the Scottish Government ensure that the figures of trafficking victims are broken down by police division and area so that local authorities can deliver an adequately funded response to support people who've been trafficked and to give them the support they need across the whole of the country?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'll certainly look at that suggestion. I think it's a very worthwhile suggestion from Sarah Boyack. I've attended many a conference on human trafficking and the dangers of human trafficking. And the last couple that I've attended have been in the Police College at Tullyallen. So I know police, of course, as our partners, are so involved in this important work. So I'll certainly look at the suggestion of how we can get a further breakdown of those figures through the national referral mechanism, perhaps. And I'll come back to Sarah Boyack on the detail of what is the art of the possible. But certainly, the more detailed the figures we can give for more targeted local action, I think the better.
Sarah Boyack.
Can I very much welcome that commitment, because I understand that for people who've been trafficked, being able to get somewhere safe is the absolute priority, get some support. And people who've been through that experience, particularly if the traffickers have employed them in this country and they're vulnerable, not just because of the journey, but because of their new experience, access to affordable housing in another part of the country may be the first part of the way forward. So could the Cabinet Secretary look both at the police issues in terms of locality and also the issue of safe housing that would follow on and release people from what has been a horrendous and miserable experience?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, again, I wouldn't disagree with anything that Sarah Boyack has to say, having been again to a number of conversations, roundtables and discussions on the human trafficking issue. These are precisely the type of issues the likes of Migrant Help, TARA will work closely with local authorities on, although a lot of their support will be in and around the psychological trauma and dealing with that psychological trauma, which can be vast. They will also work closely with local authorities and around the housing. But I will speak to the Housing Minister, Kevin Stewart, about this issue specifically, and if there's more that we can do with our local authority partners on the housing side in terms of a safe place and getting those victims into a safe place, then certainly this government will do all that we can.
Angus MacDonald.
Thanks, President Officer. From guidance for health workers and businesses to help identify signs of human trafficking and a proposed legal duty on public authorities to notify police about suspected human trafficking, to increase support for organisations supporting victims and the imposition of serious crime prevention orders on individuals involved in such organised crime, does the Minister agree that the Government's message is clear? Scotland rejects the horrific crime of human trafficking, and we must do everything to support the victims of this appalling abuse of their human rights.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, of course, I agree with that, and I'm really pleased that there is a really strong cross-party consensus on tackling this abhorrent crime. And you talk to people, as I have done out in the public, about modern-day slavery, for example, and they think we're talking about countries on another continent. We're not. We know that slavery, that exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation, labour exploitation happens right under our nose on our very doorstep. So we'll continue with those initiatives. I think the important point from Angus MacDonald's question is that there's not one single measure that's going to be a panacea to tackle this problem. No silver bullet, but there will be a range of measures that we can bring forward and are bringing forward. But we certainly don't lessen our laurels. Clearly, last week's horrific tragedy has shown that the threat is all too real, and we have to continue and redouble our efforts to make sure that not a single person is exploited in this way.
Jenny Mara.
Presiding officer, we heard reported on the news on Saturday that one Vietnamese woman or child victim was making her way to Glasgow to be met by friends. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, in light of that, he knows I have been asking him about the Section 11 entitlement to guardianship for unaccompanied children arriving in Scotland under the Human Trafficking and Exploitation Act that this Parliament passed 4 years ago. Can he commit to inclusive and implementation by the 1st of April 2020? And can I ask him what consideration the Scottish Government is giving to a Scottish national referral mechanism, taking identification and decision-making out of the hands of the Home Office and its hostile environment?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, on the two parts of her question, if I take the latter first and I'll come back to the first part of her question. We are working closely with the UK Government on this. We know that from the example that Jenny Mara has given, and I can't obviously confirm whether those reports are true or not, but certainly going by the example that Jenny Mara gave, it's important that we continue cooperation with the UK Government and of course other governments and police forces right across the United Kingdom and even internationally. It's important that we do that. So we're working with the UK Government to ensure that reforms to the national referral mechanism lead to an NRM which works for Scotland and reflects our distinct systems and indeed our distinct legislation. If the resultant conversation is that there should be a separate NRM, and that would make sense for the victims of this tragic and abhorrent crime, then that is something that we're of course open-minded to. But it may, in some respects, because of the nature of human trafficking, just as Jenny Mara has mentioned, with the terrible tragedy that unfolded in Essex, it may make sense to continue as part of that UK NRM. But I don't dismiss what she says. And on the first part, I know and pay credit to Jenny Mara for the work that she's done on human trafficking, but particularly supporting the victims of child trafficking. She and I had a meeting along with the Minister for Children and Young People, Mary Todd, on this issue. So our timelines are absolutely as they were then. They have not changed, they have not shifted. There is no gap in provision, it's important to say, in terms of the Scottish Guardianship Service, which I made mention to in my answer to Sarah Boyack. That ensures there's no gap in provision for young people that may be victims of child trafficking. If there is an update, I will provide that after the consultation has closed.
Thank you very much. Question number 2, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to University of Glasgow research findings that former professional football players are 3.5 times more likely to die of degenerative brain disease than the general population.
Cabinet Secretary Jean Freeman.
This important Scotland-based study strengthens our understanding of lifelong health outcomes in former professional footballers, and in particular in the areas of dementia and neurodegenerative disease. It is crucial that all adults and children can participate in football safely, and a range of actions have already been taken in Scotland, which was the first country to produce national guidance on dealing with concussion in sport. We remain in close contact with experts at the Sports Scotland Institute of Sport and the Chief Medical Officer at the Scottish FA, and will work with partners, including PFA Scotland, to consider carefully the study and any action which is required.
Kenneth Gibson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response. This was a robust study of 7,676 male ex-professional footballers in Scotland born before 1977. And although not assessed specifically, heading footballs is assumed to have had an impact, with 1.7% of ex-footballers having died of neurodegenerative disease compared to 0.5% in the general population. Does the Cabinet Secretary share my view that in banning the heading of balls by under-12s, probably from likely to be from next year, the Scottish Football Association has taken a very welcome step forward, joining only the US Soccer Federation as the only organisation in the world to take this positive decision?
Cabinet Secretary.
The survey, which included goalkeepers as well as outfield players, doesn't confirm whether heading is to blame for the increased incidence of neurodegenerative disease compared to the general population. Head trauma, for example, may also be a factor. So it talks about factors in that increased incidence, nor are its findings highlighting any unique issues with football in Scotland. It is only the start of understanding the relationship between football and neurodegenerative diseases, and further research reasonably is required before we have definitive answers. However, the Scottish FA is considering whether to reduce heading training for younger players, and while no decision has yet been taken, I agree with the member that the Scottish FA has responded positively to this important piece of work.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you again, Cabinet Secretary. The study also found that former footballers were less likely to die of other common problems, such as heart disease, some cancers, and lived on average 3¼ years longer than the general population. Does the Cabinet Secretary therefore agree with Dr Carol Routledge, Director of Research at Alzheimer's UK, when she said that the benefits of playing football outweigh the disadvantages, and that good heart health is the best way to keep the brain healthy, so that when played safely, football is still a great way to stay mentally and physically active?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I thank the member for that question, because I think it highlights one of the important approaches that we need to take to what is a very important study, and that is to recognise that what we're talking about is how football can be played safely. And he is right. It is important to point out that it confirmed the benefits of physical activity on other aspects of lifestyle, particularly the reduction in heart disease and some cancers. Football does remain an excellent way for people to stay mentally and physically active, and I know that many members across this chamber will have seen its value in terms of some of our older citizens, and indeed those suffering from dementia, with some of the work that community football trusts do. So there are benefits to people of all ages, to both boys and men, women and girls, from participating in the game. And our role now is to look with those others that I mentioned at how we achieve any more safety in terms of how the game is played, and how young people in particular are engaged with it and are trained to be football players.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you again, Presiding Officer, and again, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary, Malcolm Steele is a 56-year-old Aberdonian, and he received the shock diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease 4 years ago. An Aberdeen fan, he played street football from 5 or 6 years old, wanting to play every day. And Malcolm began playing in his primary school team and continued subsequently amateur level. His advice to others with dementia is just to keep going and never give up. But Cabinet Secretary, how can we protect not just professional but our many amateur players from possible neurodegenerative disorders?
Cabinet Secretary.
It is an important point. Although the study looked at professional players, many people play football out with that purely professional role. I think the response is very similar to the one I gave to the members, Mr Gibson's first question, and that is that we now need to look very carefully with those key stakeholders that I mentioned in that first answer at all of the outcomes of this study, at what more might need to be done across football playing as a whole, whether it is in the professional arena or not, in terms of any additional steps that need to be taken so that people can continue to both play and enjoy and gain the benefits from that physical activity, but can do so in a way that has increased protection to their safety, if that is what is required.
I'll take supplementaries if they're quite brief. Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As well as this very welcome research by Glasgow University, as Kenny Gibson alluded to, there's significant research in the United States Soccer Federation, where it is a significant amount of research that states that soccer is the third biggest contributor to accelerating neurological conditions behind American football and ice hockey. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that it's really important in making the decision about how we approach this, that we take all of that evidence in its entirety? Because I think the USA are looking at banning heading footballs from the age of under 14.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, I do. And I think that I'm very grateful to both Mr Gibson and to Mr Whittle for a very reasoned approach to what is a really important issue. But we have this research, we have that international evidence, particularly from the US. And what we want to do is we want to be able to find a way where people can continue to engage in this physical activity, which has significant benefits, but to do so in a way where their safety is increased. So it is preventative, whilst also producing benefits. And we need to take some time. We need to work with Scotland's Institute of Sport, the Chief Medical Officer of the Scottish FA, our partners in PFA Scotland and others, to look at what additional steps might they sensibly take, and where can government, where can we assist them in doing that.
And Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Going forward, what guidance and support could be given to school PE teachers to raise awareness of this potential risk, and also to reinforce the important role that schools play in keeping young people fit?
Cabinet Secretary.
So schools play an absolutely critical role in keeping young people fit. It is an introduction to physical activity that you gain in school that will in some way or other stay with you through the rest of your life. I have to confess my introduction was remarkably poor, and I've worked against that ever since. But it does make a big difference for many people, and you know there are all sorts of different kinds of physical activity now in schools. The guidance that we might give to schools in terms of this particular study, I think, is at this point will be informed by that further work that we need to undertake and need to undertake with Sport Scotland and those others that I mentioned. But you're absolutely right, the member is absolutely right, that this is a critical area of work and picks up on the point made earlier that we're not just talking about professional football players.
Thank you. Question number 3, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what changes it will make in light of the recent report by the Council of Europe's Committee for the Prevention of Torture and its finding of an emergency in Scotland's prisons.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
The Scottish Government published its response to the committee's recommendations earlier this month. Since the committee's visit in October 2018, many of the issues that the committee raised have either been actioned or are in the progress of being actioned, including the treatment of women with mental health issues. I've been clear that recent increases in the prison population are having an impact on our prisons, and in particular on the conditions within Barlinnie. We have provided additional funding for the Scottish Prison Service in the current financial year and are working with a range of agencies. The Scottish Government and SPS are currently looking at interim measures to address conditions within HMP Barlinnie ahead of its replacement.
Liam MacArthur.
The Cabinet Secretary, who mentions the issue of mental health, and the CPT concluded that the solitary confinement sections of Cornton Vale and Ross House are, quote, totally inappropriate environments for holding seriously mentally ill women. The stories are nothing short of horrific. One woman had bitten through the skin and muscle of her arm down to the bone. Another sat in isolation surrounded by blood and faeces on the wall. A third set fire to her own hair in cell. These and other women, in the words of the CPT, quote, should not have been in the prison environment, let alone segregated for extended periods in solitary confinement. My former colleague Alison McInnes warned the government about this over 5 years ago. Why is it still happening?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank Liam MacArthur for raising what are important issues, and I read the CPT report in full. Christina McKelvey and I met with the delegation when they came here, and we were as shocked as Liam MacArthur would be at some of the very graphic case examples that were given, to give them some level of reassurance. This government is taking forward some progressive justice reforms which will hopefully reduce the number of women in our prisons, full stop. And I know he's a supporter of those progressive reforms, such as a presumption against short sentences. 90% of women in our custody are in there for 12 months or less. So we hope to reduce the numbers first and foremost of women coming into our prisons. Secondly, on the mental health issue, it's one that we take extraordinarily seriously with the mental health strategy and the announcement of further funding. I can confirm that there have been a further increase in mental health workers in our prisons, so hopefully that will give the member some further reassurance. He'll also be aware that the Cabinet Secretary for Health, on my left here, is reviewing the delivery of forensic mental health services in Scotland. That will very much include the provision in prisons. That review is expected to report by the end of June 2020, and of course I'll work closely with the Cabinet Secretary for Health to consider recommendations for people in prisons. But be in no doubt at all that this government denies Cabinet Secretary for Justice take very seriously the CPT's report, and hopefully the actions I've outlined will make a drastic difference to women who are in our care.
Liam McCarthy.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary again for that response. The CPT found people being segregated for months and occasionally years, with people becoming institutionalised into solitary confinement. Effectively, reintegration doesn't happen. Governors sign off the Rule 95 orders to remove someone from the general prison population for 72 hours. The extensions are signed off by the SPS in the Justice Secretary's name. And the CPT found people being given minutes to appeal, informed only by a slip of paper being put under their cell door. Is the Cabinet Secretary comfortable with how SIUs are being used? And can he confirm his precise role in this process?
Secretary.
Well, I'll write to Liam MacArthur with further detail, but it was one of the actions that we decided to take forward in the back of the CPT report, was to look at that very element that he's talking about. So I will give Liam MacArthur further detail. I think it's important to put the CPT report into a bit of context. It was a very critical report, and there's no getting away from that. I'm certainly not taking away from that, but it's worth saying that the majority of prisoners stated themselves that they were treated correctly, and of course the delegation received no allegations of deliberate ill treatment of prisoners by staff, and they were very encouraged, the CPT, by the progressive policy changes that were underway, particularly in and around female offenders, which Liam MacArthur has already touched upon. So, on specific points, what I'll do is I'm sure we can give him a copy of our response to the CPT report. If I can't give him that in full, then I'll certainly give him a summarised version, and he and I am happy to take a dialogue with him further on the specific issues that he raises.
Thank you very much. My apologies to Liam Kerr and to James Kelly for waiting patiently throughout all the questions, but I'm afraid there's not enough time this afternoon available.